Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and what you just saw before this is actually a take that I thought was really glitchy, but when I ended up watching it again, I realized that it just had a couple of weird sound quirks, but overall, the webcam wasn't nearly as staticky as it was when I was looking down to view it. Which I usually do that just to keep track of the time, so I can't help but see myself when I record. Sorry. Don't worry, I'm not a narcissist. Okay, so today I'm going to be reviewing Fire Emblem Awakening for the 3DS, which a lot of you are probably thinking, Paul, that's long overdue. And there's a reason for that. One of the main reasons why I didn't review Awakening until now was mainly because by the time I had started consistently reviewing video games, Fire Emblem Fates had just come out, and I wanted to review the newest games that had just come out for Nintendo systems as a priority. And I also didn't want to review older games that were too similar to a new game that I had just reviewed, seeing as Fates used the same engine and largely the same sound effects and animations as Awakening. I thought that the review would kind of seem a little bit redundant if I did it, but now that I'm about to beat Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and I've realized that Awakening is the most represented Fire Emblem game in Nintendo's history, I figured, you know what, I think I better give my retrospective on this, because this was the Fire Emblem game that saved the franchise from destruction. And not only that, but for most people, it was the first Fire Emblem game they played. Do not ask me why they took so darn long to get on the bandwagon, because every Fire Emblem game released in North America, except for Shadow Dragon, was an amazing experience. But let me first give you a little bit of a retrospective on the year 2013, just so that you can get my perspective, being a long-time Fire Emblem fan since 2005, when Path of Radiance came out. So, when Awakening came out, it was a huge refresher from just coming off of Shadow Dragon in 2009, after considering that that was the most underwhelming Fire Emblem game I had played, and to this day that still stands. Awakening was like, whoa, this is what they can do on a handheld? Heck, a lot of this looks better than Radiant Dawn. Now, admittedly, Radiant Dawn wasn't a graphical powerhouse for the Wii. I don't think it was ever intended to be. They really prioritized gameplay over graphics. But Awakening, I think they wanted to strive for an even medium, even if a few compromises had to be made. Like, for example, yes, the characters moved around and articulated with their hands during some of the story sequences, but at the cost of them having really Wind Waker-sized feet. Stuff like that. But you couldn't deny that at the time, the battle animations were the best that they had been in the series. And it was really cool how there was this anime style of the character's face flashing across the screen and actually speaking out a catchphrase as they delivered a critical hit. One thing that Awakening really nailed for me was it helped the characters' personalities stay fresh long after they had worn out their welcome. Which was a really bad habit of old Fire Emblem games, is you would get these super cool characters, and then you'd never hear them speak again after their initial first chapter or two, until they died. And Awakening fixed that by many things, which I won't name all of them because that would take forever, but suffice to say that characterization was a huge contributing fact that made Awakening have quite possibly my favorite cast in a Fire Emblem game yet, although I'm still debating on Echoes, but seeing as Echoes has a couple of questionable character choices, I'm still weighing my options here as far as quantity over quality kind of deal. So, Awakening, when you compare it to games that came before it, it was very much a basic Fire Emblem game. The map design was kind of on the underwhelming side, although nowhere near as bad as Echoes. And also, they didn't really try to revolutionize the series. Like, the biggest thing from a gameplay perspective was the addition of pairing up, which you could do that by either standing next to another unit or by actually making a command known as pair up. You could do that before the battles, but you could also move your unit onto another unit and then say the command pair up in the menu. Then you'd have two units fighting side by side. The main unit that you were controlling would do the primary amount of fighting, and the secondary unit would occasionally jump in to do what I call a dual strike, or they'd do a dual guard, where they'd jump in the way of an enemy's attack and prevent you from taking any damage. This meant that your healers could get some nice experience because they would stay in the background of, say, a knight, and then they could prove themselves useful by blocking. So it was a nice way to make sure that no unit felt underutilized, which, of course, most Fire Emblem players are going to do that anyway. But if people didn't like Radiant Dawn's structure, Awakening was a return to that, let's just give you your army, and you're going to stick with that army, and you can customize it however you want. So they basically ditched the multiple perspectives angle, they ditched the terrain elevation, the base level ups. Awakening felt like a huge step backward for me, coming from, well, Radiant Dawn was the last true Fire Emblem game. So since 2007, I saw more things be taken away from Awakening than I saw them added. Like supports, the only S-rank supports you could get were those of Marriage. Now, Marriage was kind of an interesting idea that has unfortunately become a viral meme, where, yes, Marriage existed in past Fire Emblem games, but it was only in the credits that you'd find out, and you would have to, like, get a perfect rank. Well, in this game, they took it a step further and gave you the ability to have kids. And said kids would be able to fight in your army because this game relied heavily on time travel, which was another big thing. Time travel was, like, unheard of in the Fire Emblem series. And so a lot of players, myself included, were like, how the heck is this storyline going to even stand water when it's so radically different? But in retrospect, I realized that the radicalness of Awakening, while nowadays it may seem like it's more of a play it safe title, it was necessary for casual players to jump in because of Fire Emblem's notoriously bad habit of not being very accessible, with the exception of Lynn's quest in the original Fire Emblem, whenever I get around to reviewing that. Awakening introduced for North American audiences the casual mode. It was in Fire Emblem Mysteries of Shadow and Light for the DS in Japan, but that game never made it to America. I can see why, because Shadow Dragon was so lousy, I don't think anyone wanted a sequel. Basically what casual mode did was it allowed for a unit to die in battle and then return the next chapter. Now, a lot of people did not like permadeath, especially in Radiant Dawn, when you had so many shifting perspectives, and the final battles were really, really, really difficult. Like, you had to be pretty much perfect in how you leveled up your units. Otherwise, you'd have to restart the whole game. And I think a lot of people were turned off by that, as much as veterans like me really like the challenge, and we enjoy getting these bonds with these units that have unique personalities, and then just tearing out our hair, being like, no! How could they die on us? Yeah, like, a lot of us resorted to resetting our games, overusing the battle save feature in Radiant Dawn. Well, Awakening doesn't have a battle save, unless you're playing in casual mode. And so that was Intelligent Systems' way of saying, okay guys, if you're going to keep resetting on us, you might as well just take away character death altogether. You have the option to put permadeath back on, which is good for the longtime fans, but I think it was mainly because of casual mode that the series received as much mainstream appeal as it did. Awakening also brought back the world map feature from Sacred Stones, making it easier to grind, and it gave you much more resources as far as, you want to make your character a total powerhouse and make the final battle a breeze so that you only need 2 units? Go for it. We're not going to stop you. Awakening was also a huge breakthrough title in the fact that it was Nintendo's first official attempt at bringing DLC to one of their games. I know the first official attempt in North America was in New Super Mario Bros. 2, but Fire Emblem Awakening came out before New Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan, so we have to count the Land of the Setting Sun, as I call it. And the DLC, looking back on it, was kind of ho-hum, but the rewards were really worth it. Like, there were some super brutal challenges for those of us that longed for the glory days of Fire Emblem, and man, you felt like the game just like gave you $1 million for the rewards you got. So I would recommend just buying all of it. Now, one thing that stuck really hard for me as a longtime Fire Emblem fan was the fact that Awakening also tried really hard to be a mainstream Fire Emblem game. And I don't mean mainstream as in like not a crossover, but in the sense that it knew that the modern audience was in like probably the LGBT community, and they were also, they preferred the more anime style, overt nature of the sexualization of women and men to a certain degree. So Awakening featured more revealing outfits, more suggestive comments. In fact, there was even a DLC package that allowed you to view certain sorry, my phone went off. That allowed you to review certain characters in swimming outfits. For me personally, there was this... What? A Fire Emblem game rated T? Radiant Dawn was only rated E10. So yeah, Awakening is not the kind of game that's easy to play if you've been a long-time Fire Emblem fan, but I'm not going to say that it's a bad game. Far from it. The game introduced a lot of mainstay characters that have made such a lasting impact that Nintendo just can't get enough of them. Take Robin, for instance. We've had there was a customizable avatar in the first Fire Emblem for Game Boy Advance, but they only appeared in sort of this limited third-person capacity. But in Awakening, it's a fully fleshed out character. You can change their appearance. You could choose both a strength and a weak stat, and you could actually level up your tactician. Fates took that to the next level by making your tactician the main character, but the fact that they evolved it was a really cool way of sort of like their own twist on the whole Japanese player insert character. I wish they fixed that in Tokyo Mirage sessions, but we'll get to that once I make the review of that game. Also, Awakening had a story that, well, again, it felt like the bare minimum compared to like the very politically heavy stories of the past, but it wasn't terrible either. It had some really cool twists that, mainly because of the time travel gimmick, it was the kind of stuff that if you were the type of guy that's just like, oh, Paul, I've played Fire Emblem since the beginning. There is nothing that'll shock me anymore. No. When Marth's true identity was revealed for the first time and none of us knew what to expect, it was like, oh, whoa, that's a really cool plot twist. And basically all the reveals about Robin were really cool too. It's just a shame that the final battle was kind of lackluster, but the music was anything but. Awakening really just reinvented that orchestral majesty that we thought was perhaps gone after Path of Radiance, but not only did Awakening bring it back, but it also kind of sort of defined what Fire Emblem music should be. Instead of having a battle track and a map track be separate, Awakening intermingled the track so that it would basically take the same track but intensify when you went into a battle. And as a result, most Fire Emblem games are sort of following that tradition to some degree or another while constantly refining. Also, the general graphical style has been consistently reused on pretty much all of the 3DS titles. The sound effects have been reused a ton. Even Tokyo Mirage Sessions uses the same da-da-da-da-da chime that Awakening had. It was a very successful game, both critically and sales-wise. And I'm not going to pretend that Awakening's a terrible game just because certain longtime Fire Emblem fans find ire with the game's story, mostly because they're comparing it to older games. But if you look at Awakening from the standpoint of this was where most people started the series, then I would say from that perspective the story is flawless. Because they got rid of most of the political drama and tragic betrayals that most Fire Emblem games were known for, it allowed for new players that wanted to prioritize gameplay over story to get engaged. And if they didn't want to get engaged into the main story, there were the support conversations, which of course were as good as they had always been, and to a certain extent better because of the little voice blurbs that they'd put in there. I think overall, Awakening may not have been the best step forward for longtime fans, as I've been saying this whole review, but it was a good attempt at bringing a casual audience into a scene of a very hardcore game. And as a result, Nintendo has now considered Fire Emblem to be one of their major franchises, which I kind of always thought that, but critics and sales, I always got to say otherwise, right? So, I don't really like giving review scores on my channel, as you might have noticed, but Awakening, I would probably put somewhere between, well, it's definitely not as good as Radiant Dawn. I'm still kind of torn on where it stands in relation to Echoes, because while I think Echoes has a better story and some neat gameplay ideas, I think Awakening was an overall better package. So I'd say it's probably my third favorite Fire Emblem game. Definitely the most newbie-friendly. And again, it set the standard for Fire Emblem music, just like Super Mario Galaxy did for the Mario series. So I would definitely recommend giving it a try, especially play it on casual mode if you really can't stand the permadeath that defined the series in the first place. But if you do, give Awakening a try. You'll find that it has some really charming characters, delightful battle animations, and some decent plot twists in the story, even if the final battle is kind of underwhelming. But hey, its music made it into Smash Brothers, so that must count for something. So I hope this review didn't go on too long. If you feel like I didn't talk about the gameplay enough, just watch some of my other Fire Emblem reviews. It really hasn't changed much from its typical grid-based strategy roots. With that in mind, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and keep fighting for what you believe in. Bye.